Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us here today. Welcome you along to our IIRSM Ireland branch meeting. Our Irish branch has recently reformed, and in my capacity as chair, my name is Edel Corrigan, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today on behalf of the committee. As we all know, the IIRSM, we aim to be the cornerstone for promoting risk management across various industries, and are dedicated to providing valuable resources, networking opportunities, and professional development to our members. While we strive to foster a community where professionals can share knowledge, best practices, and support each other in achieving excellence in their respective fields, we do ask then that if you have any interest in joining us as a member, for any non-members out there or members who would like to become more involved within the committee, to please do come and get in touch with us either through our social media and through the website or with any of the members from our committee. I'd like to thank also all of those that have completed our survey to date, and we will be in contact with you in the coming weeks. So for today's session, I'm delighted to welcome Darrell Wake, Director of the Business Development for DECRA Organisational Safety, who will explore our understanding of brain-centred hazards and how they can help us lead to more safety advances, as many of our organisations still face the persistent challenges linked to human errors. So no doubt today we will gain valuable insights into how we tackle those challenges and understand brain functioning and the learning strategies for hazard identification and management. So I'd like to welcome you, Darrell. Thank you very much for joining us today. And with that, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Adel. Okay, I think it's good afternoon for all of us. Just some aspects around myself. The accent immediately gives it away. I'm not from Ireland. I'm actually not from the UK either. I'm from Australia originally. So my background, I spent 10 years in the Royal Australian Navy, essentially as an air traffic controller on warships. And then I entered the mining, sorry about that. It's always one of those things, technical difficulties. I'll just start. Thank you very much. I then entered the mining industry, and I spent, it was 10 years. I started at the lowest level from an operational perspective. And then sadly, two very close friends of mine died at work, which really impacted me. So I was at a point where I was either going to leave the mining and the minerals processing industry, or decided to make a difference, and that I did. So like many of you, I became a safety practitioner. I've done it ever since. I've been with the legacy company BST, who was Behavioural Science Technology, acquired by DECRA now 14 years ago. And so we now rebadged as DECRA Organisational and Safety and Reliability. So we're a culture and behaviour change organisation. DECRA is actually a big company, if none of you have ever heard about DECRA before. So we're now not the world's largest, but we're one of the world's largest testing and inspection certification. We're nearly 50,000 people. Next year we're 100 years old. So we're one very small part of a much bigger organisation. So that's enough, a bit about me. So I've worked in 58 different nations. I do cultural and behaviour change companies. And the topic today is something we believe is quite new, really interesting, fascinating, and quite a lot of our clients are actually finding a lot of interest in that. So if I can start with, I guess, where have we come from over the last 40 years? If we sit back and think, what were the major changes around safety performance to get us closer to that desired vision that I'm sure all of us have on this call today? It's to create a safer and more secure world, particularly at work. So if you go back, I mean, the legacy company BST, now DECRA, and many other organisations as well now, back in the mid to late 1970s, that they did a hell of a lot of work around behavioural-based safety. Then in the 1980s, perhaps to the early 1990s, it was around leadership development. And then in 2000s, it was around serious injury and fatality prevention. Now, bearing in mind, there's been a lot of changes in legislation and regulations and all that sort of good gear as well. But if you actually have a look at how effective have we been, well, we have to a certain degree. If you look at non-fatal rates across industry, across the planet, particularly first world nations, you can actually see a really nice decline in those incident rates. But sadly, when you look at the fatal rates in organisations such as the UK and the USA in particular, it may well be the same as Ireland. I know it is the same in Australia, particularly over the last 20 to 30 years. We aren't making a much of an impact around fatality rates, in particular in the workplace. So what we've done over the last 5 years as an organisation, so we've actually spent quite a bit of time with our neuroscientists and some of our psychologists and also some of our organisational safety experts across the planet. We've done a lot of research, we've looked at a lot of data, and we're pretty excited to present this today. Is around what we call brain-centered reliability. So what happens in our heads and why people sometimes make good or bad decisions when they go to work. So and again, I want to be very clear, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a guy that's been around for a long time. So the brain is, we all know it's quite a complex organisation, and it can drive our human performance and reliability. By capturing all this information, then we actually have to decide, whether it's safe or at-risk behaviours, good decisions, bad decisions, etc., etc. So that's the starting point for us. It's very complicated what happens inside of our head and how we actually analyse all that data, and then how that manifests into the decisions that we make at the end of the day. If I go down a bit further, excuse me. So it's very interconnected, the brain. And the biggest thing that a lot of you probably on the call today can resonate with, we have two main different types of the part. On one side, it's that fast brain. So it's really, it's around working on autopilot, and I'll do things automatically. And it takes very little effort to use that part of the brain. The other part of the brain is the slow brain. So as you can see, it's very analytical. The downside to that is it actually takes a lot of effort to use that side of the brain as well. I think if you have a look at people like drivers when they actually go to work, they're in this fast brain mode at least 50% of the time, or even if not more than that. The other thing is, if you've got, and I've been in a lot of manufacturing plants, and all I do is make, loaves of bread, baklava, whatever it is, the same thing I'm doing day in, day out. So these type of people are typically situated and working on that fast side of the brain. So we do things instinctively. So that's the starting point for us. The fast side, we do things automatically. The right side, it's more deliberate. It's more analytical, but it's a matter of when do I shift from one side to the other to make the best choices when I actually go to work. So when we were looking at some of this data, when we identified, it was literally thousands of pieces of work. What our neuroscience actually stripped out was 7 brain-centered hazards that increase our vulnerability and those areas, particularly sometimes that we make when we actually go to work. So by understanding these, it can actually help us, particularly as an organisation, put some control measures in place that will enhance our reliability efforts. So I'm going to go through these in some detail, not a lot of detail, one at a time. So the first one is that fast brain functioning, which I referred to before. So this is when we react immediately to whatever stimuli is in the workplace, and that slow part of the brain assesses more complex situations more thoughtfully. The main thing here is that both is critical for safety in the workplace. So the fast brain provides reactions, but sometimes can be biased as well. a classic example, cigarette smokers, all right? I always smoke cigarettes, and I probably like to smoke cigarettes. It takes, absolutely no effort. I'm just going to, go and smoke a cigarette, but it actually could be harmful for me as well. And that slow brains is more, as I said before, it offers us more careful analysis, but it takes time and effort. So again, it needs to be a bit of a balance between both to actually be successful in the workplace, particularly around our behaviours, whether they're safe or at risk. I do have a little story down the bottom, and you can all read as well as I around BP Texas City, how the operators overfilled this particular distillation tower. However, there was an incident only about 3 weeks ago now, where there was a worker on top of a roof, and what this particular worker was doing was doing some emission sampling testing. So they had this quite complicated sampling unit, and it was up on top of a roof. The roof of this factory is 20 metres tall. So they set a table up, and they put the monitoring unit on the table. Right next to this individual happened to be a fiberglass sunlight. What actually happened with this, the particular table, one of the other workers that was up there actually kicked accidentally the table, and instinctively, so the fast brain, the stimuli that come to this worker's particular head, went to capture this particular thing that was then falling. What the individual then did was lost his balance and actually fell 20 metres, and that individual is still in hospital today. But it's something that you do automatically. You don't even think about this stuff, but fortunately, it led to a significant event, which I think I will be okay, but it's a serious injury for life now. So that's the first brain set and hazard and some consideration around working in autopilot. Now, there's a classic statement that goes with this second one, which is around those things that we see at work, so visual recognition. The statement is, and I'll do a little exercise for those on the call today, we actually see with our brains, we don't actually see with our eyes. So it highlights how some of this data, when we combine it with those processing, I guess cognitive processing is what I was looking for. We actually filter out a lot of this data through our previous experiences and perhaps through some biases as well. Now, this could be lessons learned. It could be from where I grew up, the industry that I worked in, etc., etc. So while this attention further narrows our focus on goals and perhaps even our emotions as well coming under it, and again, I'll show this exercise in a moment, understanding through what we actually recognise through what we see is crucial for safe decision makings. Now, before I do have my wonderful assistant here, Christian Hopper, we've got some tech problems, but we're working with it. Before I actually get Christian to move on to the next particular slide, which is this little activity, I'd just like to share something. So again, I'm from Australia. This is it's going to be a beautiful location. So I used to like fishing. I used to like having a barbecue. Used to like having a few drinks with my friends. I thought, and I think, this is a place where a lot of us would actually like to spend like a Sunday afternoon during the middle of summer. So I'll get Christian to show this beautiful location. Now, so it's a lake and it's a hill. You can see everything's right for a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Can I get anybody to put their hands up or say this would be a nice place to spend a Sunday afternoon, middle of summer? Would anybody agree with that? So Edel's one, all right. And I'm not sure if there's any other, because I don't think I can see anyone on the screen, by the way. However, back to what I said from the outset, you see with your brains, not with your eyes. Now, for those of you that actually put their hands up, it actually is not a very nice location. So if I get Christian to move it just one more, because I told you exactly what to look for. What you actually see here, it's a very average location. It's actually a brick wall that's very average. And the background is actually, it's not a lake. If I went back one slide as well, what you'll actually see is there's actually a power line. If you can, I'm not sure if you can highlight that, Christian, but there's a power line that actually is over, which actually makes it look like a reflection. And there's actually a road in the background as well. All right. So, and another incident that was there before was around pipe alpha. So, the maintenance people, they always knew that that valve handle was actually positioned in one location. So, but what he didn't know, it was always in that one location. But what he didn't know, behind that valve handle, there was pretty much nothing in place. All right, and of course, we've all heard the Piper Alpha story. All right, so the third brain-centered hazard is around distraction. So we all know it's a problem. We all know, particularly on the roads, we hear about it all the time. A lot of folks are on mobile phones these days, etc., etc. So it is a problem, and it's a problem outside of driving as well in the workplace. So it's a significant risk, and at times we've got to juggle different tasks. So, our attention to detail and focusing on one thing at one time does limit our capacity to executing safe behaviours in the workplace. Another classic example that I believe there was no actual fatals involved was SO Longford, so just outside of Melbourne in Victoria, in Australia. And if you read that investigation report, I think it was, what was his name? Andrew Hopkins was one of the lead investigators. These particular operators in the plant at the time were dealing on shift up to 12 to 1,300 alarms per hour. So it is a problem. We need to be focused and fixated on our tasks day in, day out. The next one is memory. We actually do this exercise a lot. It's one if you haven't heard about it. George Miller was an American professor back in the mid-1950s, and he looked at our ability as human beings to recall certain amounts of information and actually use that information accurately, and not at work, but other stuff was based on his studies. And on average, Miller said it was 7. So 7, but it could be, he said, plus or minus 2. So as low as 5 and as high as 9. And we do this exercise. We actually, we read out 20 words, and then we ask the participants, how many words can you recall? And it does play. I've never seen anybody get more than 10, if I'm honest. So it's essential to safety as well, our adherence to protocols, responding in critical situations in the safety context. A lot of times we've got very challenging procedures. We've got, we rely on our memory from past experiences a lot of time to gauge the level of risk when we go to work, which again can lead to underestimating the level of exposure. Again, if we link this to a significant incident, Deepwater Horizon, we know that there was several steps in the monitoring the well that was overlooked, and again they've got all this stuff going in the background, so there was not a lot of noise there already around the platform when they were trying to undertake the shutdown of the well, and of course we know the end result there. Okay. So social things. This is one of my my favourite ones, I think. So, another way you can look at it is group think as well. So, how do we actually think and make decisions in our team environment, group environment, etc., etc.? So, there's always a lot of peer pressure that shapes our behaviour, whether that's good or perhaps bad. And those group dynamics can reinforce or actually work against whether we actually put particular protocols and systems in place. I actually spend a lot of time in the Middle East, and I see this all the time. I'll have a group of, and no disrespect, right? No disrespect to anyone here, but when I see nationals, so it could be Saudi nationals, Emirati nationals, Omanis, whatever it is, And then the typical workforce out there is demographics of probably might be 70 to 90% expatriates, and they're from a typical, primarily from Asian subcontinent. I'm just being honest. And what I see in like a briefing room, you do the toolbox tour. Could be a national, that's the manager, the supervisor, and nobody speaks up. Absolutely nobody speaks up, and the boss is always gone. Even if the decisions or the agreement, it might not even be an agreement. So, and again, a classic incident took place, which was the Challenger space shuttle incident, where there was engineers. I think it was 2 engineers from Thiokol. They went into NASA and said, "We've got grave concerns. We've now done several launches. We've always got scorch marks on the O-rings. We've now got an environment, the climatic conditions were colder than what it had ever been at Cape Canaveral, and yet the decision was to launch, and it was the collective NASA senior leadership team said, don't have enough data, everything's happy, there was no dissent at all. And we know what happened there with Challenger, unfortunately. Okay, fatigue is the next one. So again, it poses a major threat to the level of risk and safety within the association by the effect that it has at play on how our brain operates, and also our decision-making process as well. So what can it impact? Things like our attention, our memory, our concentration, which we know, of course, is critical to staying alert to hazards and making good decisions whilst at work. One example, some of you might have seen the recent series that have been on TV over the past 2 or 3 years around Chernobyl, or have probably learned it around the event. So a lot of these workers, apart from the emergency that was, I guess, happening before their own eyes, but a lot of these operators were working at least 13 to 14-hour shifts. Some of them hadn't had any days off at work for literally many weeks. And the data in the investigation concludes that fatigue played a major role in some of the decisions, poor ones perhaps, as an output of that event. Okay, and then the last one, stress and urgency. I think at any point in time in our life, each and every one of us would say, I've felt this at some point in time. But again, it can significantly interrupt or affect our decision making and our behaviours as well. So under stress, we may struggle again to focus. We can make rushed decisions, and at times perhaps we overlook critical safety steps in procedures or tasks that we have to go about. Again, back to a major critical disaster that took place was around 3 Mile Island back in 1979. And there was a lot of apparently malfunctioning equipment. Communications was poor as well, and the whole situation caused a lot of stress. There was a lot of urgency that was needed on behalf of the operators, and apparently that again they've made some major mistakes and lapses, which led to the situation transpiring as it did until they actually got it back under control. So that's those 7 in a bit more detail. And then some strategies from our point of view, whilst we have a whole process and a program around this. So some items. So number 1 is we believe you need a comprehensive approach which will help you and your organisation mitigate the risks from these brain-centred hazards and promote awareness and addressing human performance vulnerabilities and our bias towards improving safety as well. So that's the first one. The second strategy is around aligning decisions with your core values that I'm sure most of your organisations have got, defined somewhere, that ensures that safety is not only prioritised, but it's actually valued as well. And it starts with the top leaders, and they really set the tone for the organisation by fostering, good open communication, ethical decision making, ensuring that whatever standards you have around safety or anything, to be honest, is upheld, and then look at every opportunity to assist your decision making with technology, and even this day and age with things like artificial intelligence as well. The next thing is around system enhancement. So around your procedures, ensure that they're designed so when people read them, they're clear, they're concise, they're not 400 pages and not in language of choice as an example. And they're focused on preventing brain-centered hazards. Use very simple language, step-by-step instructions, and what we like to see is visual prompts. So it's like stop, it's like checklist must be done here, etc., etc. So we make sure before we go to the next step that everything is covered off. So things like your toolbox talks. There's toolbox talks and there's toolbox talks. So engagement, feedback, making people are completely aware around situational awareness at the point of the task as well, particularly those tasks that have high risk exposure. So that's the third one. And we do, members of our team do actually do a lot of time undertaking assessments, whether your existing or company's existing procedures do or do not take into consideration these brain-centered hazards. And then the last thing is around reliability of people's behaviours. We would have all have come across things like, 5-minute risk assessments, last-minute risk assessments. However, when your employees do these last-minute risk assessments, whatever it is, we need to take them from that fast brain situation where I'll just, I call them happy sheets. Everything's happy, versus getting them across to that slow part of the brain where, yes, I've thought about methodically each and every one of the criteria that's in there. And I know when I need to stop the job, or perhaps one of these elements is not in place. I'm not even going to start. I'm working that more analytical versus that autopilot part of my brain. That's some strategies. Sorry, Christian. Technology. Okay, thank you. So what I want to share as well is just some insights around making safe decisions. So what's it about? So it's about the core 3 elements. So we have 5 elements that we've designed that we know will target those safe 7 brain-centered hazards. So the first thing is, what do I see? And we've got activities and we've got methodology that helps people understand those exposures and some control measures. So once I see it, how do I think about this risk or exposure that I'm looking at now? And the third most important part is, what do I do? All right. The fourth major part is then around how I think in my team. So that's back to that social, that group thinking, and how do I become, we see more dissenters and people who want to speak up and perhaps challenge than those that will sit back and withdraw and think, this is the way we do things around here. And we also have another module around what we call moving, but that's more around soft muscle tissue injuries. Why did we design that? Merely because of the sheer volume of people that actually have long-term absenteeism because there's soft muscle tissue injuries. So if I go back to one of our clients, so they're actually, they're in the marine transportation business. They had troubles with integrating new teams. They had problems with, people just saying, I'll sit back and the boss knows best. They were also trying to expand their market share. High injury frequency rates, sadly, when just after the catalyst for our initial discussions was sadly around a fatality. And they did have reputational damage as well, just before we started engaging with this particular organisation. They also had a lack of safety processes, so their HSE management system was emerging at best. They had a complete workforce disengagement, so it was all driven. Safety was driven from the safety professionals' office. They definitely had a clear lack of data to derive, sound decision making, and there was no behavioural observation protocols, and it was a really reactive safety environment. So you can see the numbers there. Within 18 months, through making safe decisions, we reduced the injury frequency rate within 18 months by 87%. Workers' compensation, this is when you start to get the financial director's attention. So that dropped from 1.3 million down to about 30,000 within the first 12 months. And you can read the rest as well as I can. So it was a really, really sound effort. And we have some data as well that collectively, since we started this process, I think it's about 1.4 billion in savings, for our clients, let alone the excellent behavioural reliability, the knock-on around safety, performance, etc., etc. But just to conclude, so this is not a 1 hour presentation. It was just a quick and dirty and a quick overview of where we're at, our brain centre reliability. But I think, collectively we're starting to focus and understand better and better around, our brain functioning, its impact on our work performance, safety in general. Now it offers leaders and companies some better insights that can really start to enhance our operational reliability and safety performance as well. By implementing some of these strategies, we believe we can create, much more secure, efficient, reliable and high-performing organisations from a sustainable approach as well. And so we believe we've been down that journey, as I said from the outset. We've done the behavioural piece, we've done the leadership piece, we've done serious injury and fatality. We believe to get those fatal rates down further, it's time for all of us to start to think about what happens in our brain and why people do what they do. So that was all for me. I think back to Errol now.
Thank you, Daryl. That was extremely interesting, very fascinating. I meant to mention at the beginning also, just so that people are aware, we have recorded this session and it will be available under the members' resources for any of the IIRSM members. We have a couple of questions, Daryl. If I can just take you down through them, they're in the chat box. First of all, any advice on how technology such as AI or real-time monitoring systems assist in making better safety decisions and monitoring? We could maybe get your thoughts on that.
It's a very good point. I'll give one example. Of AI. So the legacy company BST, Behavioural Science Technology, now DECRA, were the first organisation to coin the phrase behaviour-based safety, register and sell it as technology. We still do it today. It's evolved a lot. So we now have very smart software. So the observation process, we're not that advanced at the moment. And to be honest, the big point of view is also a bone of contention as well, particularly through CCTV. So we believe one of the most powerful mechanisms is the consequence of feedback. So yes, we still have our behavioural observational process. We call it BAP, the Behavioural Accident Prevention Process. But now what we have is very slick and smart software where you enter all your comments from the observation, particularly those that are at risk. Now, what we've been able to do is use AI that actually generates why are people... Now, the conversation uncovers that as well, but the most important part is when you're looking at trends and themes from a behavioural perspective, why are people doing, possibly putting themselves in harm's way? We can now use analytics from AI to start to generate clouds, concerns, trends around critical behaviours. That is, so again, nothing's happened, right? Nothing's happened, but something could happen. So the AI in our adaptive software is now building for these organisations that invest in our services around themes and trends that can now narrow down into what are these behaviors and what's causing most of these issues around these themes and trends that are concerning from their organizations. So that's just one example where I think AI and new technology could come in to play. There's probably others as well. You might have seen, I recently saw, again, it's a CCTV system and it's capturing data around, people. It can recognize the AI and the camera systems can recognize people not wearing PPE. Again, my thought is back to what I said before. I'm not a big believer where, we need the big brother approach. If I'm honest, if it helps us, fine. But I would rather have a bunch of leaders in my business that can recognize people working at risk, have a relationship and a culture where I, as a leader, myself as an employee, I can feel confident I can go over and have the conversation around, hey, Christian, why aren't you locking out this piece of equipment? And then that dialogue, that two-way dialogue, it's like in your family, you're going to tell your children, don't stick your finger in the toaster because something bad's going to happen. I'm still a bit of an old school, the power of feedback, never overlook that. I really hope that address that question.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It's about what we do with that information and how we apply and how we learn from that, and touches on what you spoke about as well, about the social behavioral aspect and the social mindset and how that progresses things. There was another question came in there around I'm supposed to frame it from Navid, is around stress in the workplace and the added hazard of that on, I suppose, our decision-making process and hazards led from that perspective. If you had any point on that. I do. One of the starting points for us, again, go back to really who we are. We're a behaviour and culture change organisation. That's where we do. Now, our point of view, it's to do initially a diagnostic or an assessment on organisational culture. And I'll tell you why that's important from our point of view. It's a bit like when you go into a doctor's surgery, right? You're feeling a bit poorly, you go in and on arrival, the doctor doesn't give you a box of medicine and say, Daryl, disappear because this box is going to fix all those, those medical and health problems you got. They don't do that. They sit down with you, they take some measurements, they poke you, prod you, answer some questions, and then say, I know, Daryl, you've got gout, and I know exactly the box of tablets. So when we do diagnostics, so back to answering the question now, that's framing the question from our perspective. We have a very powerful tool. It's called the cultural diagnostic instrument, right? Now, we chop the data into many, many different ways, and we do a lot of benchmarking. When we see, and there's four scales. There are four management or organizational scales. Management credibility is one, leader member exchange, perceived organizational support, and there's one other as well. I can't remember off the top of my head, but these four scales from our technical research, again, this has been up and running for over 30 years, this diagnostic, but when those scales are low, you'll see lots of stress in your organization. So if my relationship with my management, my company, and perhaps my supervisor, perhaps even my peers, if that's poor from a cultural perspective, there's going to be a lot of stress in the organization. The data also tells us if you've got that sort of a culture, that sort of environment to work in, people don't hang around very long. So you're going to have high turnover, you're going to have poor safety performance, poor quality problems, and perhaps even if you look at financial returns, it's going to be poor as well. It's not going to be as good. So, and it's an environment where people will make mistakes. All right. So again, where does it start? It comes back to the top. So leadership at the top set the tone for the organization and they create culture. Culture is not created at the working interface. It's not created. It's impossible. So that comes back to leadership, right? Again, I hope that answered your question. Yeah, no, fantastic. And we're taking in all of this information. You're giving us loads of really fantastic tools for, I suppose, helping us to push on those cases of that element of risk management in our organization. And thanks to Christian also has put up into the chat there that you will provide a copy of the slide deck and also where we can get further information about the services that your organization provides and how that may be of assistance to our organizations and the way that we work. I know certainly I'll be coming away from this looking at the risk management and risk control instead of that human error, diving into it that bit deeper and what are those risk factors and what we can apply to reduce the risk. And thanks, Julie just put into the chat there that she will email that information also out to everyone that has attended today. Just wanted to double check if we have any more questions. I don't see anything popping up.
I think, Adel, can I just add something as well for everyone on the call? There's a new book on the market and it supports, I guess, our theories and our concepts around, not over brain-centered hazards, but our point of view in as well, and Todd Conklin's book is Safety Differently. And if you haven't read it, it's around human and organizational performance. And he's one of these learned, professors. And he's got these, I think it's either 5 or 7 cardinal rules. And I really love one. It's blaming people changes nothing. And I love that. It's like I advocated, I stand for that. Blaming people changes nothing. And it's the same as this. We take good people with, I think, a good outlook on life and a good outlook of going to work. We set them up for failure as organizations. Then you throw in these brain-centered hazards and all this other stuff around existing culture and leadership and, what's valued and what's not valued in this business. And we just set them up for failure. And then once they fail, what do? A lot of times we blame them. But it changes nothing. Get rid of them. Bring someone else in. Who's to say that next person will not make the same mistake?
Very true. Very, very true. And if we take anything away today, that is a very valuable point as well. So with that, I don't see any more questions. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you very much again, Darren, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the fantastic presentation. Thank you to your lovely assistant, Christian, and assistant technically there today. Also to Julie, as always, a great help in getting us to this point of today and bringing us forward. It just leaves me to say thank you everybody for joining. I hope you have enjoyed this today, our first of our events. Hope you will watch out for us in the future for our upcoming events. And again, for anybody with any interest in finding anything more about this particular topic, the information will be sent out to you and it will be available on our LinkedIn page as well. So thank you everybody and have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks very much.